But what about those high-pressure situations like natural disasters? It seems like those situations would create a perfect storm for fraud.
You're absolutely right. Emergencies can create an environment ripe for exploitation. When there's an urgent need for goods and services, the usual checks and balances can sometimes fall by the wayside.
So how do we prevent that from happening?
One of the most effective solutions is being prepared. Instead of scrambling to find vendors and procure supplies in the heat of the moment, what if we already had essential goods stockpiled?
That makes a lot of sense, being proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly.
It's like having that emergency kit ready to go before disaster strikes.
Exactly. It eliminates the need for rushed decisions that could leave the system vulnerable to fraud. And this can even extend to having pre-negotiated contracts with trusted suppliers, so there's no question about who to contact when a crisis hits.
That sounds incredibly efficient and definitely helps minimize the risk. But what about those situations where you can't possibly predict everything you'll need? How do you ensure that aid reaches the intended recipients and doesn't end up in the wrong hands?
You're talking about beneficiary monitoring, and it's a critical aspect of preventing and detecting fraud, especially in emergency situations.
So how do you actually make that happen? How do you give beneficiaries a voice in this process?
It can take many forms. The key is to establish clear and accessible channels for people to report any concerns or suspicions they might have.
So things like hotlines, feedback forms, or even community meetings where people can voice their concerns directly.
Precisely. It's about empowering people to speak up if they see something that seems off.
Because they're the ones who are directly impacted by these programs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to just provide the means to report. Those reports need to be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. That means having systems in place to handle those reports confidentially,
Right.
protect whistleblowers from retaliation,
Of course.
and hold wrongdoers accountable.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's about building a culture of accountability from the ground up.
Right, getting them involved.
But how do we make sure those reports they're making actually lead to real change?
Well, that's where strong internal controls within government agencies and contracting companies become absolutely crucial.
Internal controls.
Yeah, it's about having a system in place that's really designed to catch these potential problems before they balloon into major issues.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
So think of it as building this culture of accountability and transparency at every level.
Okay.
This means having clear procurement guidelines, a clear division of responsibilities so no one person has too much control, meticulous record keeping, and of course regular audits to make sure everything is on the up and up.
So it's like a safety net, catching those mistakes or intentional wrongdoings before they cause significant harm.
Exactly. And it also involves making sure everyone involved in the procurement process understands the rules of the game,
Okay.
from the folks negotiating the contracts to those managing the projects and even the suppliers themselves.
Right.
Everyone needs to be aware of the consequences of breaking the rules.
So education and training are key components in preventing fraud.
Absolutely, knowledge is power.
So it's like giving everyone the tools and knowledge to spot those red flags and say, hey, this doesn't look right.
You get it. It's about fostering that sense of shared responsibility, so we're not just relying on catching fraud after it happens,
Right.
but preventing it from occurring in the first place.